Hey, welcome everyone to another Speed Seekers podcast. Today's guest is my good friend, Jeff Braun. Jeff, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me. It's, I guess under these circumstances, it's fun to do this. And I wish we were both off racing and we couldn't do this, but this sure is right there in second place for if we can't be racing.
Yeah, often our conversations take place at the racetrack, or we had a nice big long conversation at the PRI show back in Indy in December. That was a good one. But yeah, usually we're at the track somewhere. But you know, we talk often, and one of the things that we've talked about recently, because I was sort of asking your thoughts on this, but is around race strategy. And I'd like to focus on that a little bit because. Well, we'll get into that, into sort of how you approach race strategy and things like that. Because I think there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that do some of the low budget. Well, you see me doing the air quotes, the so-called low budget endurance racing, AER, WRL, Chump Car, Lucky Dog, all that kind of stuff. So we can talk a little bit about race strategy. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was coffee. You've started roasting coffee. Is that kind of a hobby or what's going on?
Yeah, it's I don't know. I guess I need a challenge, and about 3 years ago, I decided that learning to play the drums would be good, and I failed so miserably at that. I'm terrible at that I had to find something else. So I actually did. Maybe I didn't give up on the drums. They're still sitting in our second bedroom, but they're still sitting is the right word for it. So I kind of got into coffee. Just I don't really how, but anyway, there's a lot of technology involved in it, from espresso machines to grinders to refractometers and color analyzers and all of that. So that kind of attracted me to it. And I wasn't really a big coffee drinker, but kind of got into it a little bit. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to make these espressos and get these, dial in my shots right and get my tamp pressure right and my grind size and my scales all lined up, maybe I ought to just roast my own beans. And yeah, I mean, it's what you do, right?
Yeah, right. Just what everybody does, right? Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So I mean, it's kind of how you approach shock absorbers, right?
You're exactly right, and it's really paralleled that quite a bit because, I wanted to know more about shocks, so I got a shock dyno. Well, I wanted to know more about coffee, so I bought an espresso machine and then a coffee roaster, and I started delving into it and practicing and stuff and roasting my beans. And there's a data acquisition system on the coffee roaster. And so I can control the temperature and time profile of each roast and decide how much heat I want to put in and when I want to put it in and how hot I want to roast it before I stop and cool it down. And it ended up, I don't know, I needed more people, just like my shock deal. I needed more people to give me feedback. Was I any good at this, or how could I make it better, or what works, what doesn't? And again, just like shocks, I would do shocks for people and I would send them out. And at the early stages of my shock stuff, it was, okay, I'm not going to charge anything, but you got to tell me what's good and what works and what doesn't and how your car handles. And the coffee, I did the same thing. So last couple of years at the racetracks, I've just been giving coffee out, and people would come to the core hauler. We had an espresso machine, and they would make coffee, and I would get good feedback and go back and work on trying to make it better and better. And then it finally got to the point where friends were like, I really feel bad about asking you for free coffee. You need to, at least recoup your costs and pay the shipping. So I put it up on eBay, and more people ordered, and I learned more and more and more. And so now I'm at a point where it's really fun to, I'm getting really good feedback from customers, and, I charge enough to cover the cost of the green beans and the propane and the electricity and the shipping labels and all of that. And so it's not going to be a business. I'm never going to make,
you're not going to get rich off of this.
No, I guess it's the way some people go racing. If I break even, it'd be a miracle. So, but it's fun, and I'm learning a lot, and so that's kind of where it sits right now. And it's just the more people that order, the more chance I get to try to improve my craft.
So I'm curious, have you tried like 4 or 5 espressos and then got back on the drums?
Yeah, maybe that's the key. That's what I need to do. Yeah. No, there's some things that I've realized that you just have to have some kind of, this is probably a whole nother podcast, natural talent. And I know you have a lot of thoughts on that, but I think natural talent is needed for the drums, or you just have to be smart. I don't know what it is, but I'm terrible. It's, I can't do it.
Right. Maybe you just need a better data system for the drums or something like that. So, yeah.
There you go. Well, they have. I logged on and they have these electronic drums and these drum synthesizers, and I can just go click and it plays awesome. So I figure that's, if I really need to listen to the drums, I'll do that.
Well, I think it's, for listeners, I think they might be kind of interesting. I mean, you wrote an article for Speed Secrets Weekly about the, what you've learned from roasting coffee and how that applies to motorsport and things like that. And, I just think it's kind of interesting how you've done that in terms of, first of all, the way you approached roasting, as you talked about, was, you got feedback, and it's no different than getting feedback from a driver, I guess. And then, helping you tune the car and stuff. But, the way you kind of turned it around and go, and how do you apply that to racing? Can you just talk to listeners about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. While I was doing that, it was dawning on me that, people are like, my kids were like, Dad, that's the way you do everything. It has to have a spreadsheet. It has to have data. It has to have analysis. And I thought, that is the way I do everything. And is that the right way? Not necessarily, but it's the way that works for me. And then I thought, well, a lot of people in racing that come from different backgrounds and have different skill sets, and most people who can race, whether it's a track day or a professional race series, they've obviously found enough money or earned enough money to be able to do that. And it's not cheap. I don't care what series you're in, whether it's Chump Car, Champ Car, whatever they call it now, or Lemons, or any of these series, or, just running your car on a track day. It's expensive. So you've obviously come up with some way, you have some skills and talents that have earned you enough money to get there. I wonder if other people could apply their skills to racing the same way, use those procedures. And I thought, accountants or a lawyer or a business owner or a school teacher, they all have processes and procedures that they follow to be successful in their own endeavor. And I bet if they just took those same procedures and applied it to racing, whether it's they're a mechanic or an engineer or a driver in racing, and they're trying to learn and get better at that, if they just applied those skills that work for them, but adapt them to racing the same way I kind of did the opposite, adapted my racing skills to roasting coffee, I bet they could be pretty successful. And maybe they don't need to force themselves to learn a whole new way of doing things. Maybe they can use the way they know to be successful in racing. And I don't know the answer to that, but it seems like that would be reasonable.
Yeah. Do you need to be out in the middle of Texas somewhere to do all this, though? So I'm listening to you, and for listeners, this is not the best quality audio we've ever had, but it's okay. We can hear you, Jeff. Every now and then you kind of garble a little bit, but it's okay. I think, can you just talk just very, very briefly to listeners about, I think most people know that you're, super successful race car engineer. You've engineered, winning sports cars, Indy cars, top fuel drag cars, NASCAR. You've done all that kind of stuff. And I know other podcasts have sort of covered the story about where you live and stuff like that, but just kind of give listeners just the real quick, what's life at home for you and Diane?
Oh, so if the broadcast, or if my end of it's breaking up a little bit, I'll just have to go out and tighten up the string between the two tin cans out here. Or we can revert to smoke signals. Sometimes that's better than my internet connection. We live in West Texas, about 250 miles west of Dallas, out in the middle of the desert. Our closest neighbor is about 5 miles away. Our closest paved road is about 8 miles away. And so the whole social distancing thing, people have said, hey, you need to practice social distancing. And I'm like, practice? We're experts, We've been doing that for 30 years.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, you might need to homeschool your kids now. We're like, check, did that also, because we were racing and all of that. So, yeah, we live way out in the middle of no place. Our internet connection is a little bit better than the dial-up of the old days, but that's about it. And so that's about the only challenge, but it's really nice. We live up on top of a mesa, and we can see 30, 40 miles off in the distance, and there's really nothing to see. It's picture your old Western movie when they're riding in the valley, and that's kind of the view off the front porch of our house. So it's really nice to come back to after a weekend of the hustle and bustle of racing, and we can kind of relax.
And what's the name of your coffee? What's the name? How does that work?
Well, and there you go. I'm not a very creative person here, so I look out the front door and I have a view of these mesas off in the distance. So I needed a name for the coffee company, so we called it Mesa Vista Coffee, view of the mesas.
Perfect.
Not creative at all.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. And one thing I'm going to throw it here right now, but so you were on it was Dinner with Racers podcast, right? And after that, you got like 42 orders, and I said to you, well, that sounds like a challenge. So I'm putting the challenge out to everybody listening to this podcast. Come on, guys. We got to beat 42 orders.
Okay.
The race is on. We got to make sure that Jeff is super busy, roasting coffee for you. And and this is not we don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but you kind of do a custom, well, it's not custom, but it's basically a blend. You have a few different blends, but each one is separate for the person ordering it. Is that how that works? You know me, I'm not a coffee drinker, so I don't understand. Yeah, my wife Robin loves your stuff, so
yeah. Well, I'm glad she does, and yeah, I've tried to get you, our Starbucks orders of coffee for me and hot chocolate for you. So I get it. Maybe we'll someday get you to be a coffee guy, but yeah, what I do is most coffee roasters, they roast in big batches, anywhere from 10 to 100 pounds at a time. And what I do is I roast mine 1 pound at a time. So each person's order, if you order 1 pound from me, which is like the minimum order, that's like your standard bag of coffee. And I roast for that person one time. They get the whole batch, that whole roast. And then I send out the data curve, the temperature versus time curve for your individual roast. And that comes with the coffee itself. So you can see exactly what the profile looked like and what the temperature was and the cool down days and all that kind of stuff. Probably way more than people really want to know. They just want to drink good coffee. But anyway, each one is individually roasted for each batch. It's not in a big batch amongst others. So that way I can control it a lot better and make changes if I need to in between each roast.
Well, like you said, it's just like doing shocks, right? You send out your shocks and you send out a shock dyno sheet with it. So no different. I guess that's your world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
exactly. Again, it's back to the only way I know how to do things.
Right. Well, so let's talk about race strategy for a bit, because You and I were talking
Yeah.
not too long ago, and I was saying that, you know, and I hope nobody takes this the wrong way. If you're listening to this, don't take this personally as a knock against you. But, I've raced in and coached in some of these, again, in air quotes, the low budget endurance racing series like WRL, ER, and, there's Lucky Dog and there's Champ Car / Chump Car. Jeff, you and I and Colin, another driver, we did a chump car race at Road Atlanta a few years ago. Interesting strategy there. But, I've raced in those things and I've coached in them. And I made the comment to you a week or so ago going, I could ride a tricycle. And as long as I had you calling the strategy, I could win those races, because I just see so many teams messing up and just giving away races with poor strategy. So I kind of wanted to just pick your brain a little bit. And I know some of this is top secret and it's what you get paid. It's why you don't have to make $1 million off of your coffee roasting business. But what's your overall strategy to race strategy?
I would say the biggest thing is understanding some basic requirements. I see people miss that, and not just at the jump car WRL level. I see people miss that in IMSA races, and it's, you have to start out with some of the basic rules, really, that minimum drive times or maximum drive times of your drivers. Then some of the pit stop links. I know in some of the endurance races that they do, the amateur endurance races, there's a minimum pit in to pit out time. So those things will drive some of your strategy, because you must comply with those, otherwise you're disqualified. In the pro races, it gets very technical. We have 4-hour and 6-hour drive time rules. We have minimum drive times that are different for silver rated drivers versus the gold and platinum rated drivers. So we have to comply with all of those rules, and that's where I see a lot of people. I mean, that's where you start. You're like, okay, I have 4 drivers. Each guy has to do 2 hours. They can only do 2 hours maximum. So then those things drive your overall basic strategy from the start. And some people just miss those big things real early in trying to figure it out. You can't just wing it. There's a lot you can do before the race starts.
So essentially, that's prep time, I guess. And one of the things that was sort of coming to mind as you were talking about that is the other thing you kind of factor into that is driver needs. There are some drivers that want to drive a lot, some that just want to do one quick stint, some that are very fit, some that are less fit, some that are paying the big bill, so they drive more, some who are not paying as much. And, so you got to factor all those things in as well, I guess.
Exactly. And so, like in our big races, we'll do what I call a driver rotation. And, a lot of times you're in a series with a gentleman driver, but he's paying the bills. And so one of the big questions I always ask is how, if he's paying for the whole team, the question is, how much do you want to drive? And that guy may, they usually give you an answer like, well, I want to drive a lot, but I don't want to negatively impact the result. Well, it doesn't tell you much, because those guys usually aren't as fast as your pros. So they always negatively impact the result. So you have to balance that. But, if it's a bunch of your buddies and you're specking out and you're out doing a WRL race, you'll figure it out. Maybe you're going to split it up equally. And so you start there with who's going to drive, how much you're going to drive, how long the race is, and then it's easy to divide it up, and figure out who's going to start the race. A lot of times you want to pick the guy who has the most experience, because there's the most traffic at the start. So you pick your most experienced guy to start the race. Then it also comes down to, if you're in a series where drive changes are important, in other words, you don't have enough time to get all your work done in the pit stop, you want to look at driver rotations based on the ability of one driver to get out and the other to get in. You don't want your shortest guy getting out and your tallest guy or heaviest guy getting in all the time, where you got to adjust the belts massively or put seat inserts in or readjust the mirrors or whatever. So those things are considerations. So you need to just kind of write down a rough plan of your driver rotation from the start of the race to the end of the race. And then obviously yellows will affect that, because if you're planning each driver to do exactly 2 hours, it works out great, except when there's a yellow at 1 hour and 45 minutes and you pit. Now, what do you do at the end, because your driver rotation has changed? So I do it on a computer program that I've developed over the last 10, 15 years, but you can do it on a piece of paper, but you just need to write down that driver rotation and make changes to it every time somebody gets in. If you're at all used to or understand Excel, a little Excel sheet will get you that and automatically recalculate your driver rotation as things change.
So, and I don't know whether you can answer this question, because it's kind of one of those, you need to be there to some extent, I think. But is there a general rule around, I was at an event, it was an 8-hour race, and let's just say most cars could go approximately 2 hours on a tank of fuel. There were a lot of yellows. And some teams kind of took the attitude of, well, pit under the yellow, every single yellow. Well, they ended up making like 8 stops. Whereas some of the other teams, they made 4 stops or 5 stops. But, how do you balance that, I guess, between knowing, okay, we can pit under the yellow, and there is that advantage. Maybe you could talk about that. But then there's the downside is you're maybe now going to have to make more stops. So how do you balance that out? What's going through your mind when you're thinking about those things?
That's a great question, and it varies with the situation and the race series you're running. Some of the series that have the minimum pit times, pitting under yellow can be not as advantageous, because you can be in the pits for 5 minutes, for instance, and it adds extra stops. Then each one of those extra stops is 5 minutes. If it adds an extra stop, but you gain positions, or you can go longer than the next guy, then maybe there's some advantages. I mean, the basics are, obviously, what entices you to want to pit under yellow is that everybody else is going slow and you're making your pit stop, rather than under green where everybody else is going fast and you're making your pit stop. So you lose less time. But to force yourself into more pit stops during the race that are mandatory at 5 minutes long can oftentimes be a disadvantage. So how do you know? Then the question is, well, great. It could be a disadvantage, but it might not be. How do you know? The thing that I see, if there was a basic way to look at strategy that some people miss, is you need to work the race always from the back, from the end of the race, backwards to where you are now, or if the race hasn't started, obviously, to the start of the race. So you always need to know how many pit stops you need to make to get to the different bag. And you do that by, your fuel range, 2 hours, let's say you can go on a tank of gas. Or maybe there's a rule. I know when we did the chump car race, there was a rule where a driver could only do 2 hours maximum. So you knew you were going to have to pit every 2 hours. So ideally, you'd like to make that last pit stop with 1 hour and 59 minutes to go, and then just run to the end. So you work your race backwards on your piece of paper or your Excel sheet. So you go back from an 8-hour race, you go back to 6 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours, and there's your stops. Now you get a stop where you pit a little early. Suddenly you might have a splash at the end where, you know, you're going to make your last stop with 2 hours and 10 minutes to go, and you can't make it to the end. So then you have a decision to make. You can either try to save fuel, and that's another thing you need to know, another factor. How much fuel can you save in a 2-hour stint? And how are your drivers able to do that? And which drivers are best at that? Because if you could save, think about this. Let's say it works out where you have to pit with 2 hours and 10 minutes to go. You're going to have to make one extra pit stop. That's 5 minutes. At a place like Road Atlanta or whatever, that's 2 laps. That costs you the race immediately. And I'm talking 2 laps in a Spec Miata. That cost you, you know, your races, you're going to lose. So you got to figure out a way to not have to do that last pit stop. And that's by saving fuel. But you also have to know how much fuel can you save. Can you save 10 minutes of fuel in a 2-hour stint? Or do you have to save fuel for next 6 hours to do that? So those are some of the things, and a lot of people don't know those answers. And so those are some things you need to understand and have in your database of knowledge, is how long can we actually make a stint extend? And then work your race backwards. Always work it backwards. I never think about where we are and how do I get to the end. I think about the end and work back to where we are right now.
So is a good guideline being, you know, I've always, from a driving perspective in an endurance race, you know, my way of thinking is the minimum amount of time I spend in pits, the better our chances. So, you know, as a driver, you got to make those decisions of, you know, do I stuff it in the inside and outbrake this guy going into this corner? And, you know, I got a shot. If I do that, you know, I might be able to go 3 or 4 tenths quicker this lap. But if I get hit, I could spend 3 minutes or 3 hours in the pits. So it's kind of, that one's kind of a no-brainer. But so as a driver, I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about always is minimize the time in pit lane. Do you think the same way, or are there times where if we make an extra stop because of track position or doing it under yellow, we can make up for that amount of time we spend in the pit lane?
I think in general, your kind of overriding thought process is, yeah, you want to spend as little time in pit lane as possible. But I've abandoned that many times, and I've won. You know, I remember winning Sebring one year with 3 more pit stops than the second place car, and people are like, "How can that be?" And it's, you know, it's simply, you can, depending again on the series, you have a yellow flag, you come in and put fuel in it, and you restart 10th in the line, and then it goes green, and you can go longer than the next guy, and you get a yellow there after he pits under green, you get a yellow, you pit under yellow, you're suddenly in great shape. You can also do a thing where your pit stops are shorter. Again, and I'm talking now where you're not required to have a minimum pit stop time, right, in those kind of races. You can, if you keep your tank full by pitting at every yellow and you're restarting, you know, especially in a long race, you know, I'll use the DPI class that we've been running the last couple of years. You only have 10 cars. So if you pit each time and you restart 10th, and the way IMSA does it, they move all the DPI cars ahead of all the GT cars on every restart. So if you pit every time, you're going to restart 10th at the worst with no GT cars ahead of you. So if you keep your tank full, now you get down to a splash at the end, let's say, where everybody needs a little bit of fuel, and you need 5 seconds less fuel than the other guy that didn't make that pit stop before and top up his tank. and you need 5 seconds less fuel, you win the race. So a lot of times, depending on the series you're in and the rules and all of that, making more pit stops is an advantage.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point there is the, if it does come down to everybody's going to have to stop in the last, whatever, 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 15 minutes, everyone's going to have to stop in there. The car that takes on the least amount of fuel has got the advantage then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where it depends on, like if you're in this is maybe getting a little technical, but the LMP2 cars now do not get to pass around all the GT cars before the start. Only the Daytona Prototype Internationals do. So if you're in an LMP2 car and you make a pit stop, just to top it up, you really don't need the fuel, and you've only been out there for half a stint, but you come in and get fuel to try to use that theory of keeping it full so you make a shorter pit stop. The problem is if none of the GT cars stop, now you have to restart behind all the GT cars. And now you've put yourself behind 20 GT cars that you have to pass to get back up to the last guy in LMP2. So that strategy completely changes whether you're in an LMP car or a DPI. And I'm not trying to, probably many of the listeners to this podcast aren't in either one of those classes. But the point is, you need to take into consideration those kind of things. You make a pit stop. If it puts you in a jump car race behind 80 other cars, and you're faster than most of those guys, you now have a lot of work to do. You might be better off staying out and restarting in 10th and not having to try to get through all of those guys. And that brings us to a whole nother thing we'll talk about in a minute, but don't forget to remind me to talk about performance of your car relative to other people and how that affects your strategy.
And we'll get to that because I was recently at a WRL race at Barber, and, there is no minimum pit stop time. And I watched some teams where, they were just pitting their car every single time and there was a yellow. And beginning of the race, they said, we're going to do hot pulls. So in the middle of a race, they could pull a car off the track without going to a full course caution. The very first incident, there's a local yellow, some couple of cars tangled. One car went sailing down, hit the car that was stopped, pushed it into the emergency vehicle. And of course, at that point, the track said no more hot pulls. Every single incident goes to a full course caution. So it ended up, there was just a ton of full course cautions through the rest of the race. And,
wow.
So I watched teams pit their cars every single time. And there were some times where there'd be a very, very quick car and it was running, top 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of thing. And they would pit it. And, they'd pit 15 minutes after they just finished pitting. And the car was capable of going 2 hours. So the likelihood of another yellow happening an hour later was pretty darn good the way things were going. And yet they pitted the car, and now it's in 68th position.
Yeah.
And it's got to fight its way back through there. So I think that's a really, it shocked me how many teams did that. And that's, like I said, man, if I was on a tricycle, I think we could have beaten a bunch of them.
Right. The track position is an important thing. And the importance of track position changes throughout a race. Take Sebring, for example, or Daytona, any 10, 12, 24-hour race. Your importance of track position at the start of the race is almost zero. You don't really care. Just stay on the lead lap. A lot of times, if you're in a class that has a gentleman driver, a silver, a bronze rated driver with your pros, you're not even worried about staying on the lead lap. You're going to go laps down. And it's just, the strategy is, how do we get back on the lead lap and make sure we're there by 2-3 hours to go? That's all you care. You know, uh, in 2018, we won the LMP2 class at Daytona. And at one point, we were 6 laps down
Wow.
and we won. And
Huh.
it's just, we just worked to get our lap back. And that's all we cared about. We didn't get in the panic. Oh my God, we're 6 laps down. No, we knew we were going to be laps down. Just get your laps back, get your laps back. And then once you're back on the lead lap, now track position becomes important. When you're trying to get your laps back, track position is very important, but it's track position to be in a spot to be able to get your lap back through whichever wave by, pass around, final wave by, lucky dog procedure your series uses, if they use one at all. You can position yourself right so that when get yourself in that position, and we would often do this. Let's get in the final wave by position, get in that position, and then we just hold there and we save fuel and we wait for that yellow. Excuse me. We wait for that yellow, and then that gets us the final wave by and gets us our lap back. So track position is another phrase of importance that you need to think about in your strategy. And as you were saying, those guys that are going back to 86th each time they pitted were just blowing it on track position. That's it wasn't advantageous for them at that point. They were just killing their track position each time.
And not only did it hurt their speed trying to get through traffic, but it just increased the risk level as well, because now they got to pass cars after all these restarts when all the traffic's bunched up and they're trying to get through them. It just increased. And I saw some cars that tangled with another car because of that.
Yep.
So, and you touched on another point there, I think, is just, and I think it's the challenge with endurance racing for racers is patience. You know, we're as a racer, we want to lead every single lap, but it's like you said, there comes a point where you're just like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just keep working the plan. And it's eventually it starts to work out. And some of that I think comes, I mean, how many endurance races have you run in your life?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've done Daytona 32 times. And so Sebring another 15, Petit another 15 or 20, Le Mans 10 times. I don't know. That's a big number.
Yeah. I mean, so at some point you get enough experience to kind of go, I mean, I can remember early on in my driving career in endurance races, having an experienced engineer / team manager making the calls, and remember them saying, don't worry about it. We got it. And you're like, what do you mean we got it? You know, we're not fast enough right now. And they're like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We got a plan. And it's amazing how often that plan, if it's the right plan, it works out.
Exactly. And that's the thing that the engineer or crew chief or in these long endurance races where it's you and your buddies, there's somebody on the radio, whether it's the guy who just got out or the guy who's been rested long enough, but somebody's kind of making those calls. And that's where the guy in the car driving the thing doesn't really understand and doesn't really need to. I remember a race at Road America a couple of years ago in the LMP2 car, and we were trying to win it on fuel mileage. And I was telling Colin, who was driving the core car for us at the time, and I said, I told him whatever our strategy, do this, do that. And it was an hour and a half from the end of the race. And he's like, really? He says, okay. He says, I don't really understand. He said, this is like watching a movie where you don't know what the end is going to be like. And I said, yeah. I said, but we in the pit stand have already watched the movie. We're just rewatching it. You're seeing it for the first time. Huh. And that's kind of the way it is. You can't really figure all of that out. And all we were doing was working the race from the back. And we saw what the finish was going to look like. We saw all the chess moves from where we were now to the end. And we knew, it's like those grandmasters or whatever, where they go, you've lost this game in chess. And the guy goes, what? And he goes, yeah, they're like 36 moves from now, you're checkmate. And they're like, how do you know that? Well, that's, if you work your race backwards, you know how it's going to play out. And certainly in racing, yellow flags and other things can come up. And that's where you need to have, as a strategist, instant decision on what to do. You need to play those possibilities. During a race, the one thing I've always ask myself, probably once a lap, is what do I do if a yellow comes out now? That kind of I don't know, computer program loop, infinite loop is continuously running in my brain. If the yellow comes out, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Amongst all the other things I'm trying to think about, but that's always in the back of my mind. What am I going to do? Am I going to pit? Am I going to stay out? Am I going to take fuel? Am I going to take tires? Am I going to change driver? Am I in my window? What do I want to do if a yellow comes out? And that's always got to be in your mind running constantly.
That's interesting. Just that, like you said, that question all the time. And you don't need to give any like big secrets away here, but, are you using an expensive, unobtainium, tool to help you with this strategy?
So I've developed a Excel-based, no surprise there, strategy program that only I could use because it's so, I don't know, convoluted and so adapted to me. It's nothing that you could sell to anybody because they wouldn't have no idea how to use it. But I've been developing it for my personal use for 15 years. And so I use that. I have that running at all times. And what really that does is gives me quick answers to questions I know I'm going to need. And that's how I've developed this over the years. I've been in a race and I was like, okay, right now I need to know if a yellow comes out now and we're going to go around for 3 laps under yellow and I'm going to burn this amount of fuel and there's this much time left. Can I make it to the end of the race on fuel without pitting, or do I need to pit? Well, the math there isn't very hard, but it is time consuming. And if a yellow comes out, you can't whip out your calculator and your pencil and paper and start to figure that out. You have to know instantly, I have 39 liters of fuel. It's going to be 3 laps under yellow. I burn this much fuel under yellow. I'm then going to restart the race with 28 minutes to go and 32 liters of fuel in the car. And I'm burning 3 liters of fuel per minute. Therefore, I can make it. Well, you could figure that out, but I need to know that immediately. Do I pit or stay out right now? Yellow's out. And that's all this Excel sheet does, is it answers that plus 30 other questions that I've asked myself during races that I needed to know the answer to. So it's just a quick answer sheet. It doesn't tell you what to do. It gives me the quick answer for any situation that I've had crop up over the last 15 or 20 years so that I can make that decision quickly.
Is that the same Excel spreadsheet that has a tab for roasting coffee?
2 different sheets, but they look very similar.
Right.
And then I have there's a couple that's available to anybody who runs pro racing sports car series. A couple timing and scoring programs that provide a bunch of information. There's a program called HH and another one called Race Tools. Both of them very, very good. That take the timing and scoring data that is broadcast by, in our case, IMSA, IndyCar. Both of those programs are used by IndyCar and NASCAR teams. It takes that information that the series provides and then displays it in highly customizable ways for each individual engineer, data person, strategist, where we can look at, drive times of other drivers, the competition. We can look at gaps. We can look at when every car pitted last, what the longest stint any car did on fuel, because strategy is not only the strategy of your car to get your car to the end, it's also becomes combative strategy. Like, how do I best beat the other guy? Okay, I know this guy. Oh, I can see he's trying to save fuel. He's going to try to make it on one less stop than me. That's obvious based on the timing and scoring data that's coming in. What can I do to prevent that? Do I need to try to save fuel and make it on the same number of stops as him? Or should I go like crazy, build a gap, make that stop, and come out ahead of him because he's going slow to save fuel? So you need to look at the strategy component of all of your competitors as well, and try to understand what they're trying to do so that you can best cope with that and beat them.
And so you've run all these different races and stuff like that, but you've raced in both as a crew and as a driver in chump car races. You would call and go off and do those things, and I've done those things. And fortunately, I got to go with you one time. And
that was fun.
Yeah. First, I guess 2-part question. First of all, part of it is, you've driven. Does that help you? Does that help you when you're making strategy calls, that you kind of have a little bit of an insight into what's the driver going through? And in fact, you've raised a driver, so you probably have a better insight into what's going through the driver's mind than many race engineers do. Does that influence your strategy calls, you think?
For sure. No question. It gives me an appreciation for what the drivers are trying to do out there and what their workload is and what their work level is. I have a great example of that. We're running Sebring. I can't remember, maybe 2016. Colin was in an LMP car. We were at Core, and we were leading the race, and I think we had, Ranger Vanderzander, I think, was in the competing car right behind us. And people know how dark Sebring is. And I think we had like a 3-second lead and we had made our final stop, and it was all signed, sealed, and delivered as long as Colin could stay ahead of Ranger. Ranger's pretty freaking good, and it wasn't like, oh, we're just going to drive away from them. It was going to be a battle for the last 45 minutes. And so his workload, I knew his workload was high, passing a lot of GT cars, GTLM cars are hard to pass. GTD cars are hard to pass in certain areas. And then you had the prototypes, the big prototypes, who are faster than the PC cars. So his workload was high, and I knew that, and I had, I took that into consideration in what I was going to tell him on the radio and how we were going to do it. And so going back to that timing and scoring program, not the one that I wrote, but the one that's available, it shows you there's a place on there, a screen on there, where it shows you the running order at every timeline, and embedded in these tracks are timelines, usually roughly every corner. So as the cars go around each corner, it shows a live update of what the running order is. Not like you see by class, like who's first, who's second, who's third, but you cross a timeline going into turn 7 at Sebring, and it shows that right ahead of Colin is the Corvette GTLM. Then there's him. Behind him is a Daytona prototype. Behind him is a GTD car, and behind him is Ranger Vanderzander, the guy we're trying to beat. And so I knew it was getting pretty, a lot going on. And I also knew from running those races in the chump car that you can't really, when you look behind you at night, all you see is bright headlights. You can't really see who that is, whether it's another Spec Miata you're racing or some guy in one of those A-class cars that's just super fast. And I knew that was coming, that he was dealing with a similar thing. So I told him on the radio at each timeline, lights behind are prototype. 2 lights behind is Ranger. So then he knew he could give way to the lights right behind him and not lose his position. Lights behind are a GT car. He knew he was going to pull away from that guy. And so, because you need to work traffic well and not try to slow a car down and keep them behind you, because that can slow you down, and that could have let Ranger gain on him. So I knew what he was going through from having done it on a much lower level, but I had an idea what he was going through, and helped him identify the lights behind him so that he knew it wasn't Ranger, or it was a prototype and not a GT car that had just popped out from behind another GT car. And so there's a small example of understanding what a driver has to go through and helping them, with the strategy. And then you can get into the whole fuel saving thing and how to do that, and what a driver has to do and what you can expect and what information you have to give them. But no question, I think one of the advantages I have in calling strategy is having done a little bit of driving at a admittedly not very good level, but at least I understand what guys like you and other pros are going through.
Well, that was another podcast. We keep talking about that because I've asked you a couple of times, when you have gotten in the car, you're pretty darn quick. And I think it's interesting how quick you can go considering how little you've driven over the years in racing. So, but that's another topic for another day. And I think you've certainly planted the seed of a number of questions and ideas and thoughts for listeners who are doing some of these endurance races, some of the things to think about. So thanks for doing that. And again, I mean, this is all about racing, and, my goal is to win everything in life. And in this case, I really would like to see, people who are listening to this go on to eBay. So what is it? Go to eBay and go to Mesa Vista Coffee. And place an order and make sure that we get in more than 42 orders over the next week or so, and see if we can blow out the Dinner with Racer guys. That's my goal in life.
I see you're working your strategy backwards already. You got the 42 order goal, and you're going to work it backwards how we're getting there. So I think it's a good strategy. It's, I like it. I like it.
And so they can find Mesa Vista Coffee at eBay. They just go on there and search it. I don't use eBay that much, so that's how that works. Yep. You
just go on eBay and type in Mesa Vista Coffee, and poof, it'll come up there, and you'll know it's me. It's it's kind of coffee and racing all together. So on eBay, and same thing on Instagram and Facebook, Mesa Vista Coffee, on both of those, and there's links in both of those if you want to buy some coffee or just hang out and shoot me an email, or I guess not an email, but a private message or something. Love to connect with people that way.
Well, I appreciate it, Jeff. And again, we'll have another conversation about the driving part of it. Always fun talking, and I just need to find a tricycle. And you and I go to one of these races and see how we do.
I'm there. Actually, we're, the strategy part of it's so much fun that I think Colin's planning on doing some iRacing races here coming up with IMSA, and we're working on a way that we can get me in to do some strategy for him in some of these iRacing races. I know a lot of people are doing that on the IndyCar side, and it's a virtual race, but still there's strategy involved, and there's tire degradation and fuel burn and all those sorts of things. So maybe in these times we can still get our driving and strategy / engineering fix in the virtual world.
And I think nothing better than, for those of you who like coffee, grab a cup of coffee beforehand, right?
There you go. You go. Yeah, you can't do that on the pit stand.
Right. Okay, Jeff, thanks. And, as always, keep having fun.
I appreciate it, Ross. Same to you. And, we'll do this again sometime soon. It's always fun.
Always.
Want to be a better racer? There's nothing better than outdriving and outsmarting other competitors on the track. It's really all about your racecraft. The passing, being passed, race starts, restarts, it's all racecraft. And it's a skill and mindset that can be learned and improved. Ross has a webinar for that. It's the Improve Your Racecraft webinar, in which he shares strategies, tactics, etiquette, rules, and the mental mindset that makes some racers better than the rest. And those are the racers who win more often. And you'll find some of Ross's passion for wheel-to-wheel racing. The Improve Your Racecraft webinar was conducted live and recorded, and now can be yours to view, review, and learn from over and over again. Buy it once, and it's yours forever, so you can refer to it whenever and wherever you want to. Go to speedsecrets.com/webinars to download Improve Your Racecraft.